The dress didn't fit. It never fit. But it was the nicest thing I owned, and tonight was the autumn gathering, and my mother had ironed it twice and hung it on the back of my door with the particular careful hope of a woman who loves her daughter and cannot fix the world her daughter lives in. So I put it on. I looked at myself in the mirror of our small apartment bathroom, the one with the crack running diagonal across the lower left corner, the one my landlord had been meaning to replace for 2 years. And I did the thing I had trained myself to do every morning and every evening, and every time a reflection was unavoidable. I looked for one good thing: my eyes. They were good. Dark brown, almost black, with a warmth in them that people sometimes commented on. "You have kind eyes, Nova," my coworkers at the diner said. Honest eyes. That was something. The rest of it, the way the fabric pulled across my hips, the way the zipper had to be convinced rather than simply closed, the way my arms and shoulders and thighs took up more space than the dress's original designer had apparently considered possible. I filed that away in the part of my mind labeled "deal with later" and went to find my mother. She looked at me the way she always looked at me when I was dressed for a gathering, like she was proud and heartbroken at the same time. "You look beautiful," she said. "Mom, you do." I kissed her cheek. "I'll be back by midnight. Nova." She caught my hand. Her eyes, the same dark brown as mine, the same warmth, held something I recognized. A warning she'd been giving me since I was old enough to attend. Don't let them make you small. Don't let them make you invisible. Like you are Pac, regardless of what they say. "I know," I said. I went out into the New York City night and walked toward the thing that had been making me feel small and invisible for 23 years. Quick question before we go further. Have you ever had to prepare yourself, mentally, emotionally, physically, just to walk into a room full of people who are supposed to be your community? Have you ever stood in front of a mirror and had to talk yourself into your own worth before you could face people who share your blood, your history, your world? If that's ever been you, if you've ever been the one who didn't fit the image, didn't match the standard, didn't measure up to whatever arbitrary ideal the people around you decided was the only acceptable shape for a person to be, then Nova's story is your story. And if you want more stories that see you, that celebrate you, that remind you that the ones who get rejected by the room are usually the ones the room wasn't built to contain, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. We are just getting started. Now, let's go back to Manhattan. The autumn gathering was held, as it always was, in the private event space on the 42nd floor of the Ashford Building in Midtown. One of those anonymous glass towers that normal humans walked past every day without knowing that twice a year, the hidden Pack Society of the Eastern Seaboard assembled inside it to do what Pack Societies have done since before recorded history: evaluate, rank, bond, exclude. I arrived at 8:47 p.m. in my too tight dress with my hair pinned up and my mother's warning in my chest and 3 years of accumulated hoping this time will be different pressing at the back of my throat. The elevator doors opened and the room looked at me. Not all at once, not dramatically, just the way a room full of people with enhanced senses looks at anyone who enters. The quick, instinctive, involuntary assessment that pack biology makes unavoidable. The intake of scent. The reading of rank markers. The social calculation that happens in the half-second before conscious thought. And then, one by one, the eyes moved on. Oh, it's just Nova. I found my mother's friend Celeste near the bar and stationed myself beside her like a plant, finding the one patch of sunlight in an otherwise dark room. Celeste was warm and funny, and didn't care about pack rankings because she was a Gamma who had made peace with that 3 decades ago, and talking to her was the only thing that made these gatherings survivable. "You look lovely," she said. "Please don't," I said. She laughed. handed me a glass of sparkling water because she knew I didn't drink at gatherings. I needed all my faculties for navigating the social minefield. And leaned close. The Harlow twins are here. They've been telling everyone their father is being considered for the regional alpha position. Of course they have. And young Declan Voss brought a date. She raised an eyebrow. A human. I looked across the room. Declan Voss, 26. Classically handsome in the particular way of old pack money, he, aware of both facts, stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows with a delicate blonde woman who was clearly enchanted with him and equally clearly had no idea what he was. Standard Voss behavior. They collected humans the way other people collected stamps. Poor woman, I said. Celeste laughed again. And then, the room changed. Chapter 1. The Girl They Kept Forgetting to Invite. I want to be precise about what the autumn gathering was, because understanding it matters for understanding what happened next. The Hidden Pack Society of the Eastern Seaboard, formerly called the Conclave of the Eastern Territories, informally called the Conclave, or by people like me who had grown up on its margins, just the thing we do twice a year that makes me want to move to another country, was not a government. And it had no legal standing in the human world. Its authority existed entirely within the community of approximately 4,000 shifters living between Maine and Florida who had, over generations, agreed to recognize it. What it was, functionally, was a social structure, a hierarchy, a system for organizing who mattered and how much. At the top, alpha families, old blood, strong wolves, documented lineages going back centuries. The Voss family, the Harlow family, the Kane family. The names that got said with a particular weight in pack spaces. The names that occupied the front tables at gatherings and the first slots in the official registry. In the middle, betas. Functional, respected. The backbone of the actual day-to-day pack operations. Enforcers, mediators, coordinators. People with clear roles and recognized value. At the bottom, omegas, traditionally the healers, the nurturers, the ones whose biological role in pack society was relational rather than structural. In the old world, the world 3,000 years ago, before everything became what it became, omegas had been considered sacred, the emotional center of the pack, the ones whose presence created calm, whose bonds created cohesion, whose particular sensitivity to pack dynamics made them indispensable. That was 3,000 years ago. In 2024, in a Manhattan event space with an open bar and a DJ playing something that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite silence, omegas were considered the participation trophy tier of pack society. And I was an omega, who, according to every established metric the Conclave used to evaluate pack members, was also wrong in every other measurable way. Too heavy, too soft, too quiet, too much. My wolf, which I had not shifted into in public since the incident at the gathering 3 years ago that I did not think about if I could help it, was not the sleek, elegant creature that pack aesthetics favored. She was large. Larger than most female wolves. Larger, honestly, than several of the male wolves I'd seen at gatherings, which was part of the problem. She was dense and dark, and moved with a deliberate slowness that read, to people who had already decided what I was, as clumsiness. She was not clumsy. She was patient. But no one at the Conclave had ever looked at me long enough to learn the difference. I stood with Celeste and watched the gathering proceed around me and did the internal calculation I always did at these events. How long until I could leave without my mother finding out I'd left early, and would anything happen tonight that would make next time worse? The answer to the second question was usually no. Tonight was about to be an exception. Nova Bellamy. The voice came from my left. I turned. Marcus Harlow. 18, recently presented as an alpha. His first gathering in that capacity, which meant he was doing what newly presented alphas always did, establishing himself by finding someone to establish himself against. He had his father's jaw, and his mother's eyes, and the particular energy of a young person who has just been told they are important and is testing exactly how important. He looked at me with the evaluating, one dismissive look of someone who has already arrived at their conclusion and is only looking to confirm it. "Still coming to these things?" he said. Not hostile, not aggressive. Something worse. Genuinely curious. As if my continued attendance at pack gatherings was a mild sociological mystery. I looked at him. I said, "My pack, my gathering." He made a face. Not a cruel one. He wasn't even cruel enough to be deliberately cruel, which was its own particular kind of insult. He was just indifferent. "Sure," he said, and moved on. Celeste's hand found my elbow. "Don't," she said quietly. "I'm not doing anything." "You're doing the thing where you convince yourself it doesn't matter when it very clearly does." I looked at my sparkling water. "It doesn't matter. Nova." "It doesn't," I said. And I meant it. But the way you mean things you've been practicing meaning for long enough that the practice and the truth have become indistinguishable. "I'm going to get some air." There was a balcony on the north side of the event space, a narrow thing, barely wide enough for two people, that the event planners had included because the building code required it, and that every gathering attendee ignored because 42 floors up in October in New York is not a comfortable place to be. Which was exactly why I liked it. I pushed open the glass door and stepped out into the cold and let the city spread itself out below me in its enormous, indifferent, magnificent way. Manhattan at night from this height looked like a circuit board. All those grids of light, all those moving pieces, all that human activity happening in perfect ignorance of the hidden world assembled 42 floors above it. I breathed. My wolf stirred. She always stirred at height, at openness, at the smell of actual air rather than climate-controlled event space. She pressed at the inside of my sternum like something that wanted to expand and was choosing for now to wait. "I know," I told her silently. "Me too." I stood there for 11 minutes. Then the glass door opened behind me, and everything changed. Chapter 2. The man who remembered when Manhattan was a forest. He was wrong for the space. That was the first thing I noticed. Not his size, not his face, not the quality of presence that I would only later understand was the accumulated weight of 3,000 years of existence. Just the simple, immediate wrongness of him in a 42-floor Manhattan event space balcony. Like a wolf in a doll's house. Like something ancient in something new. He was tall. Not absurdly tall. Not the theatrical height of a fantasy. But tall in the way of someone whose actual dimensions are somewhat less important than the space they seem to occupy. He was wearing a black suit that fit him with the precision of something made specifically for his body, and his face was... I am going to be honest about his face, because dishonesty would serve no one. He was the most extraordinary-looking person I had ever seen. Not handsome in the magazine sense, not polished. There was nothing polished about him. His features were strong and somewhat severe. A jaw that looked like it had made decisions. A mouth that looked like it had kept more secrets than most people accumulate in a lifetime, and eyes that were, even in the dim ambient light of a Manhattan night, unmistakably and impossibly gold. Not amber, not hazel, not light brown. Gold. The particular, ancient, non-negotiable gold of something that has existed long enough to stop pretending to be ordinary. He stepped onto the balcony and pulled the door closed behind him, and for one moment, just one, the enormous city below us and the cold October air around us and the muffled sound of the gathering through the glass created a bubble of separateness that felt almost holy. He looked out at the city. I looked at him. He said, without looking at me, I've been standing in that room for 40 minutes, and you're the first interesting person I've encountered. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of someone who has never once in their life been in a situation where rushing would help. I said, "You were watching me." "I was watching everyone." A pause. "I stopped watching everyone else." I turned back to the city. My heart was doing something irregular that I was choosing to attribute to the cold. "You're not Conclave," I said. I would have recognized him. You don't forget a face like that, and more importantly, you don't forget a presence like that. The particular atmospheric quality of him standing on this balcony was something I would have catalogued and remembered from any previous gathering. "No," he agreed. "Then how did you get into the room?" "The room let me in." I looked at him. That's not an answer. For the first time, he turned and looked at me directly. Gold eyes, full attention. The particular quality of being looked at by someone who is actually, completely, without reservation looking, not glancing, not assessing, not cataloging for later judgment, but present in the way that is increasingly rare in a world of distracted half-attention. It was startling. The directness of it. "My name is Kael," he said. "Nova," I said, automatically before I thought about whether I wanted to give him that. "Nova." He said it like he was weighing it, like names had weight for him. "That's old. It's my mother's name." "Her mother's name too, I suspect," he said. "The name is older than your family knows." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" He looked back at the city. Something moved through his expression. Not nostalgia exactly, but the complex emotion of someone looking at a place they remember from before. It was what it currently is. "I used to stand at this height and look north," he said, "before the towers, before the streets, when this was forest and river, and the pack territories ran from the water to the trees." He said it simply, conversationally, like a man mentioning that he remembered when a restaurant used to be something else. The implications of what he'd said arrived in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. I said, "That was a long time ago," he agreed. My wolf, who had been patient and waiting and quiet, made a sound I had never heard her make before. Not a growl, not a whine, not any of the sounds she made in response to threat or excitement or the ordinary emotional range of a young woman navigating a hostile social environment. Something older, something that sounded, if I had to name it, like recognition. He didn't stay on the balcony long, 20 minutes maybe, during which we talked and didn't talk in roughly equal measure, and in which I accumulated the following confirmed facts about Kael, the man who claimed to remember Manhattan as a forest. He was not Conclave. He was not, in any conventional sense, pack hierarchy. He sat so far outside the categories the Conclave used that the categories simply didn't apply. He was old. Genuinely, incomprehensibly old. He didn't say a number. He didn't need to. It was in every word he chose, every reference he made, the particular way he carried the world's history as personal memory rather than learned knowledge. And he had come to the gathering tonight specifically. Not for the gathering. And for something at the gathering. He didn't tell me what. He went back inside. I stood on the balcony in the October cold for another 5 minutes, and my wolf made that sound again. That ancient, recognizing sound. And I told her, firmly, that we were going to be sensible about this. She did not seem convinced. I went back inside, and found that in the 20 minutes I'd been on the balcony, the entire social atmosphere of the autumn gathering had shifted. The DJ had stopped. People were clustered in their family groups, the way pack people cluster when something has arrived that requires them to decide, collectively, what it is. The Harlow patriarch, Richard Harlow, regional alpha candidate, was standing very straight near the center of the room, with his jaw tight, and his sons behind him. performing the body language of a man maintaining composure under pressure. In the center of the room, surrounded by approximately 12 feet of empty space in every direction, the unconscious clearing that happens around someone whose presence rearranges the geometry of a room, stood Kael. He was speaking to the gathering director, Irene Kane. Or rather, Irene Caney was speaking to him, in the careful, precise tones of someone choosing every word with maximum deliberation, and he was listening with the particular quality of attention he'd shown on the balcony. Complete, unhurried, without a trace of deference to the social pressure clearly being applied by the 30-odd pack members, radiating varying degrees of anxiety around him. Irene finished speaking. He said something. I was too far away to hear it. But I watched Irene Kane, 60 years old, third-generation Conclave director, a woman who had spent 40 years perfecting an expression of unshakable authority, go very still in the way that people go still when they have just been made aware of something that fundamentally reorganizes their understanding of the room they're in. Then Kael turned, looked across the room, found me. Gold eyes. 40 feet and 30 people between us, and smiled. Just barely, just at the corner of his mouth, in a way that felt like an answer to a question I hadn't known I'd asked. Chapter 3. The Council's Emergency Meeting. I went home. This was the right decision. This was the sensible, safe, self-preserving decision of a woman who had spent 23 years learning that pack spaces were not built for her, and that mysterious ancient men who smiled at her across crowded rooms were not things she could afford to build hope around. I went home. I changed out of the dress that didn't fit. I made tea. I told my wolf to stop making that sound. She made it anyway. At 11:15 p.m. my phone rang. The caller ID said Celeste. Tell me you talked to him, she said before I could speak. I don't know what you're talking about. Nova, the man. She made a sound that I had never heard Celeste make in 15 years of knowing her. A sound that was adjacent to reverence. Do you know who that was? He said his name was Kael. A long pause. Nova. What? That wasn't a name. That was the name. Another pause. That was Kael Dawnborne. I set down my tea. Kael Dawnborne was not precisely a secret in pack culture. He was more like a legend that serious people didn't seriously believe. The way serious people don't seriously believe in most things that would require them to restructure everything they think they know. He was in the oldest pack histories, in the foundational texts of the Conclave's predecessor organizations, going back further than the Conclave itself. The first Alpha, the original bloodline from which, according to the oldest accounts, all pack lineages ultimately derived, 3,000 years old. Last confirmed appearance, a gathering in London, 1887. Before that, Vienna, 1614. Before that, a gap that the historical record handled by simply not addressing it. That's not possible, I said. I have 3 separate people who recognized him from the old portraits, Celeste said. Richard Harlow has called an emergency council meeting, tonight. They're trying to figure out what he wants, and why he came to a conclave gathering for the first time in over 100 years. I was quiet. Nova. Celeste's voice dropped. He was watching you. Before you went to the balcony, multiple people noticed. He was watching you for the better part of 40 minutes and ignoring everyone else in the room. That doesn't mean anything, I said. It means something, she said. I don't know what, but it means something. I went to bed. I did not sleep. My wolf made that sound all night. The emergency council meeting happened in Richard Harlow's townhouse on the Upper East Side, which I know because Celeste, who had a contact on the council staff, sent me updates via text starting at 1:17 a.m. The texts read, in sequence, Harlow is trying to position himself as the liaison. arguing that since he's the regional alpha candidate, he should be the one to approach Dawnborne officially. Irene Kane shot that down. She's saying this requires full council consensus. Someone just asked why he came to a New York gathering specifically. Apparently, there are gatherings happening in 6 other cities this weekend. He could have gone to any of them. Nova, I need you to stay calm. They found a reference in the historical record. 1887, London Gathering. The last time Dawnborne appeared at a formal pack event. The record says he attended because of a specific individual. He stayed 3 days. Then he left, and the individual went with him. Nova, the historical record doesn't give the individual's designation clearly, but the physical description is... It's being debated, but the consensus in the room is that she was an Omega. Nova, are you awake? Nova, I was awake. I was sitting in my kitchen at 2 a.m. with my tea gone cold and my wolf so loud inside me that I had to press both hands flat on the kitchen table just to stay in my body. I typed back, "It's a coincidence, 3 dots. Then, he asked Irene Kane one question before he left the gathering tonight. One question. Do you want to know what it was? I stared at the screen. I typed, "Yes." Her response came after a pause that felt longer than it was. He asked for your address. Chapter 4. What 3,000 years of patience looks like. He didn't come to my apartment. He was more careful than that. More considered. He understood. I would later understand that he understood almost everything, not from arrogance, but from the accumulated pattern recognition of 3,000 years of watching people. That appearing at the apartment of a woman he'd spoken to once for 20 minutes would be alarming rather than welcome. Instead, he was at the diner. My diner, the one on West 46th where I had worked the breakfast and lunch shift for 3 years, where the cook knew my order and the regulars knew my name and the particular quality of normalcy that a job provides to a person whose non-work life is complicated. I arrived at 7 a.m. in my uniform, black pants, white shirt, the apron that had the coffee stain on the left pocket that I'd never fully gotten out, and he was at the corner table, the one I always put my difficult customers. He was drinking black coffee and reading something on his phone, and he looked, in the ordinary morning light of a New York diner, both completely incongruous and somehow exactly right. Like he'd been in this specific chair before. Like all the other chairs in all the other centuries had been leading to this one. He looked up when I walked in. Gold eyes, morning light. No smile this time, something more considered than a smile. I said to my coworker Danny, who was staring, "I've got table 7. I walked over. He said, "Good morning, Nova." I said, "You found out where I work." I found out several things, he said. I could have found out more. I stopped when I had enough to find you without being invasive. Where you work, where you eat, what time your shift starts, I said. That's not invasive? I didn't go to your apartment. You're here. You're here, he agreed. Neutral ground. Your territory, technically, since you work here. You can ask me to leave. I looked at him. He held my gaze with the particular patience of someone for whom time works differently. What do you want? I said. He said, "To talk to you." You could have talked to me last night. I did talk to you last night. For 20 minutes. Preliminary, he said. Last night was preliminary. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, large hands, unhurried, and looked at me with the directness I was already, against all self-preserving instinct, coming to recognize as simply how he looked at things. No filter, no performance, just attention. I've been looking for a long time, he said. I'm not in a hurry. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't know what I found. The diner was doing its morning business around us. 3 other tables, the smell of coffee and eggs, Danny pretending to wipe down the counter while watching us with unconcealed interest. Everything ordinary, everything completely ordinary. I said, "What did you find?" He said, "You." Just that. You. No elaboration, no qualifier, no performance of significance. Just the simple, complete, 3,000-year weighted word, delivered in the unhurried voice of someone who has been waiting long enough that the arrival of the thing they were waiting for doesn't require dramatic announcement. My wolf made that sound. I made myself take out my order pad. "Can I get you anything else?" I said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite the smile from last night. Something more patient. "I'll have whatever you recommend," he said. I wrote down the French toast, Danny's specialty. The thing I ordered when I'd had a bad shift and needed something that tasted like being taken care of. I walked back to the counter. Danny appeared at my elbow immediately. "Nova," she whispered. "I know," I said. "Who is—" "I know. He looks like he's been—" "Danny. Waiting for you specifically. Can you just put in the French toast order?" She put in the French toast order. I stood at the counter and breathed and told my wolf, for the 4th time in 12 hours, to be patient. She had nothing to say about patience from someone with 3,000 years of practice at it. He came back the next morning. And the morning after that. 4 mornings in a row, corner table, black coffee. The watching me work with the particular quality of attention that I was starting to understand was just how he existed in the world, fully present, completely observant, without the performative quality that attention usually has when it's trying to be noticed. On the 4th morning during my break, I sat down across from him with my own coffee. He looked at me. I said, "Tell me something true." He said, "What kind of true?" "The kind that costs something to say." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've watched empires form and collapse. I've watched ideologies that seemed permanent become footnotes. I've watched the pack hierarchy evolve from something that was genuinely sacred into something that has largely forgotten what it was for." He paused. "I stopped attending pack gatherings in 1887 because the last time I attended one, I found someone, and losing her was sufficient reason to stop." I held my coffee cup. "What happened to her?" I said. "She was mortal," he said. "The way most things are." A long pause. "I'm mortal," I said. "I know. That doesn't bother you?" He looked at me with the gold eyes that had watched centuries. "The alternative," he said carefully, "is not looking. I did that for 130 years. It turned out the cost of not looking was higher than the cost of looking." I drank my coffee. He drank his. Outside, Manhattan performed its ordinary miracle of 10 million people existing simultaneously in a small space, and somewhere under the city, and in the towers above it, and in the ordinary-looking buildings where pack families had lived for generations, the hidden world went about its business. "The Conclave is going to be a problem," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "They're going to have opinions about this." "They generally do," he said. "They've been having opinions about me for 3,000 years. I've found the most effective response is to remain unimpressed by the opinions." I looked at him. He looked back. "I need time," I said. "I have time," he said. Simply. Completely. I believed him. Chapter 5. The Weight They Called a Flaw. 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, Kael came to the diner every morning and we talked. About everything. About nothing. About the city and the pack history, and the human world that existed in parallel to the hidden one, and the particular strange joy of finding that someone who has known the world for 3,000 years finds your observations about it genuinely interesting. He never pushed. Never crowded. Never performed the urgency that I was braced for from someone who had, apparently, crossed a century of deliberate absence to appear at a Manhattan gathering because of me. He was patient the way deep things are patient, oceans and stones and the slow, certain movement of tectonic plates. And in those 3 weeks, the Conclave began its campaign. It started small. Celeste reported that the council meetings, which had gone from monthly to weekly since Kael's appearance, were circling a consistent theme. What does he want? Why her specifically? What is the correct response? Then it became less small. Richard Harlowe's eldest son, Declan, appeared at the diner on a Tuesday afternoon. And he sat at the counter and ordered a coffee he didn't drink and spoke to me in the tone of someone delivering a message they've been carefully coached on. "The council is concerned," he said. "About what?" I said. "About the attention you're receiving from Kael Dawnborne." He paused. "About whether you understand the significance of that attention. Whether you're equipped to navigate it appropriately." I looked at him. I said, "Equipped?" He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "The Conclave has responsibilities to all its members, including making sure that interactions with figures of significant power are managed in ways that don't create complications for the broader community." I said, "Are you telling me to stop talking to him?" "We're suggesting," he said carefully, "that it might be appropriate to redirect his interest towards someone with more standing to receive it." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Someone like who?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was written in the very fact of him sitting at my counter. The Harlowe heir, whose family had been maneuvering for the regional alpha position for 2 years, who had a younger sister recently presented as an alpha female, who had everything the Conclave recognized as valuable. Not me. Someone appropriate. I refilled his coffee. I said, "Tell the council thank you for their concern." He left. I went to the back of the diner and stood with my hands braced on the prep counter and breathed until the thing in my chest, the old, familiar, trained into me response to being told I was not the right shape, the right rank, and the right category for the thing I wanted, became quiet enough to function. My wolf did not make the soft sound. She made a different sound, a warning. That night, I went to Celeste's apartment and told her about Declan's visit. She sat very still while I talked. Then she said, "They're going to escalate." "Escalate how?" "The Harlowe family wants the regional alpha position. They need Conclave council support to get it. Kael Dawnborne's attention on anyone in this territory is political currency, Nova. If they can position themselves as the family that facilitated whatever relationship he's seeking, or better yet, if they can redirect that relationship toward their own line." "He's not a resource to be managed," I said. "No," she agreed. "But they don't know that yet. They've never met anyone they couldn't manage." She looked at me carefully. "Have you told him any of this?" I had not told him any of this, because telling him felt like asking him to fight for me. And I had spent 23 years not asking anyone to fight for me, managing my own terrain, finding my own footing in pack spaces that had never been built to support my weight. "Nova," Celeste said. "I handle my own problems," I said. "He's 3,000 years old. That doesn't mean he's mine to deploy." She looked at me for a long time. "Do you understand?" she said finally. "What it means that he came back? After 130 years? For you specifically?" I looked at my hands. "I'm trying to," I said. She reached across and covered my hands with hers. "The thing they're calling your flaw," she said. "The too much of you. The too heavy. The too soft. I need you to hear me say this clearly." She waited until I looked at her. "He has known queens and warriors and leaders of civilizations. He has had 3,000 years to develop preferences. And he sat in your corner table for 4 mornings in a row, watching you carry plates and pour coffee and be exactly who you are before he sat down and said a word. Think about what that means." I thought about what that meant. It was a lot to think about. Chapter 6. The night they went too far. The escalation came on a Friday. I was walking home from the diner. The night shift, finishing at 10 p.m., the particular bone-deep tired of 8 hours of work that I usually managed with a podcast and the awareness that my bed was 20 minutes away when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because it was late, and unknown numbers at night carry a different weight than unknown numbers during the day. The voice was Irene Kane's. Nova. Professional. Careful. The voice of someone who is prepared for this conversation. I need you to come to an emergency council session tonight. There are matters that require your presence. I said, tonight. It's time sensitive. I said, can you tell me what this is about? A pause. It concerns your interactions with Kael Dawnborne and the Conclave's official position on those interactions. It's important that this be addressed before the situation becomes more complicated. I stood on 46th Street in the October night and looked at the lights and the people and the city doing its enormous, indifferent thing around me. I said, I'll be there in 40 minutes. I called Celeste. She answered on the second ring. I said, Irene Kane just called me to an emergency council session. A sharp silence. Then, don't go alone. I'm not going to bring Kael to a council session like a... Not him. Me. Her voice was tight. Nova, this isn't a conversation. This is a formal proceeding. You need a witness. Give me 20 minutes. I gave her 20 minutes. She arrived looking like she'd been getting ready for a fight. Jaw set. Eyes clear. The particular energy of a woman who has been in pack politics long enough to recognize a setup from the outside. We went together. The council session was held in the Conclave's official meeting space, a floor of a midtown office building that, during business hours, operated as a perfectly ordinary architecture firm and, after business hours, functioned as the seat of Eastern Seaboard PAC governance. 7 council members, Richard Harlow, who was technically not on the council, but who was present as the regional alpha candidate and clearly had been involved in calling the session. Irene Kane at the head of the table, and, which I had not been told to expect, Declan's younger sister, Mara Harlow, 22, Alpha presented. Everything the Conclave recognized as desirable. The sharp elegance of old pack blood, the specific kind of beauty that centuries of selective Conclave aesthetics had decided was the correct kind, the calm assurance of someone who has never had reason to doubt their own welcome. She was there as a proposal. I understood that the moment I walked in and saw her, I was there as an obstacle to be managed. Irene Kane opened the session with the formal procedural language of a body that takes its own authority seriously. Nova Bellamy, you've been called before the council to discuss a matter of community concern, specifically, the nature and implications of your ongoing contact with Kael Dawnborne. I said, we have coffee. A council member I didn't know well, older, beta class, the kind of person who has served on committees their entire adult life and confused the committees with the cause, said, the council has determined that the contact represents a significant political and social dynamic that requires formal guidance. Guidance, I said. The Conclave has a responsibility to all its members, Irene said, including ensuring that interactions with significant external figures are managed in ways that serve the community's best interests. Richard Harlow, who had been silent, said, we are prepared to offer Kael Dawnborne a formal Conclave introduction, through appropriate channels, to an appropriate representative of the community. He looked at his daughter. Mara Harlow met my eyes, and I saw something in hers that I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not contempt, but something much more complicated. Something almost like apology. She hadn't asked for this either. I looked at the council table, at Richard Harlow's political calculation wearing a human face, at Irene Kane's genuine belief that she was protecting community stability, At 7 people who had decided, without asking me, without asking him, or that I was the wrong shape for the story I was in. The old, familiar weight settled on my chest. Non-essential. Not the right choice. Someone else would be better. I had been hearing variations of this since I was old enough to attend gatherings. I opened my mouth. The door opened first. He didn't knock. Of course he didn't knock. He walked into the council chamber with the particular quality of someone for whom the concept of a space being closed to them is genuinely, historically inapplicable. Not aggressive, not dramatic, simply present, in the way of something that has prior claim to every room it enters. Kael looked at the council table. He looked at Richard Harlow. He looked at Mara Harlow, who had gone very still. He looked at me. Then he crossed the room. 12 people watching. No one speaking. The specific silence of a room that has just recalibrated its understanding of its own authority. And he stood beside me. Not in front of me. Not between me and the table in the protective gesture of someone removing a person from a threat. Beside me. And he turned to face the council. He said, in the low, unhurried voice that carried 3,000 years of context in every syllable, I believe you were in the middle of something. Richard Harlow recovered first. He was nothing if not resilient. Kael Dawnborne, he said, we're honored. We were actually hoping for the opportunity to speak with you directly. The Conclave would like to formally welcome you. I know what you'd like, Kael said. He wasn't unkind. He was simply exact. You'd like to position your family as the relevant entry point for whatever I represent. That's a rational calculation. It's also irrelevant to why I'm here. A beat. I'm here, he said, because someone called a formal proceeding to pressure a member of this community about a personal matter that is not the Conclave's domain, and I don't. A pause that lasted about half a second and somehow contained the full weight of 30 centuries. Except that. Irene Caney said carefully, with respect, the Conclave has oversight responsibility for pack conduct and territorial agreements, he said. Not for who a pack member has coffee with. Not for who I speak to. Not for the management of anything that is happening between myself and Nova Bellamy. He said my name. In that room, with that weight behind it, something in the air changed. Not metaphorically. Literally. The particular atmospheric shift that happens in a room full of pack members when an alpha of sufficient age and power stops being polite and starts being clear. A pressure change. A pulling tight of the space. Richard Harlow, to his credit, didn't back down immediately. The community's interests. Kael looked at him. Just looked. And Richard Harlow, alpha candidate, patriarch of the most politically powerful pack family on the eastern seaboard, stopped speaking. Kael said, "Are noted." Then he looked at me. Something quiet in his gold eyes. A question. I straightened my spine. I looked at the council table. I said, "I think we're done here." Celeste made a sound from behind me. We left. Chapter 7. The bow that remade everything outside. Cold October air. In the specific relief of a building's door closing between you and the thing that was trying to manage you. I walked for half a block before I stopped. Turned around. He was right behind me. Of course he was. I said, "You didn't have to do that." He said, "I know. I was handling it." "I know that too." "Then why?" "Because they had called you before a formal proceeding to pressure you about a personal choice," he said. "And I've watched that pattern for 3,000 years, and I don't enjoy it any more now than I ever did." I looked at him. "It happens to me at every gathering," I said. "It's been happening my whole life. They tell me I'm the wrong shape, the wrong size, the wrong rank. They've been saying it since before I was old enough to understand the hierarchy I was being measured against." He was quiet. "And you," I said. The thing I needed to say, The thing I had been building toward for 3 weeks, and one council chamber and all the mornings of black coffee and unhurried conversation. You are the source of the hierarchy, the origin point. If you're real, if you're what the histories say you are, then everything the Conclave uses to measure me came from you. Your bloodline, your structure, your original design. He held my gaze. And I need to ask you, I said, whether the thing I've been found lacking by, is actually yours. A long silence. The city moved around us. A cab went past. Somewhere above us, a window was lit, and a person was doing the ordinary thing of living their life in a building while below them, a woman confronted the oldest thing in the hidden world about the hierarchy it had created. Kinney said, "The structure I built 3,000 years ago, in a world that no longer exists, was not built to produce what the Conclave has become." I waited. "It was built," he said, "around the principle that every role in a pack was sacred, that the Omega's function, the holding of emotional truth, the maintenance of relational bonds, the capacity to feel what the pack needed before the pack could articulate it, was not secondary. It was foundational." He paused. "What it became, in the centuries between then and now, is not what I designed. It is what hierarchy does when it forgets what the hierarchy is for." I absorbed that. "The thing they've been calling your flaw," he said. I looked at him. "The size of you, the softness of you, the way you take up space." His voice was even, deliberate. "Your wolf is larger than any wolf in the Eastern Conclave. Did you know that?" I said, "That's not a flaw," he said. "A marker. The original Omega line, the founding line, the line from which all Omega bloodlines derive, produced wolves of unusual size. It was a sign of potency, not of excess, of power, not of problem." He paused. "The name Nova is older than your family knows. I said that the first night. I should have explained what I meant." I was very still. "Your mother's 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 mother," he said. "And before that, and before that, and before that. A line of women who carried something the Conclave's current evaluation system classifies as aberrant because the evaluation system lost the original key for what it was measuring." I said, very quietly, "What are you saying?" He said, "I'm saying the thing they've been rejecting you for is a direct inheritance from the original pack design. I'm saying your wolf is large because she comes from a line that was always meant to be large. I'm saying you have been measured by a system that lost the manual and has been guessing incorrectly for 500 years. He stepped forward. And then, in the middle of West 47th Street, on a cold October night, in front of no one and everyone and the enormous indifferent city going about its magnificent ordinary business, Kael Dawnborne, 3,000 years old, first of his line, the origin point of the entire pack hierarchy, bowed his head, just his head, not a performance, not a declaration, a recognition. The bow of someone who has spent a very long time knowing what something is and is finally in the presence of it. I felt it in my chest, in the place where my wolf lived, like a key in a lock, like a word I'd been waiting to hear in a language I'd always known but had never been spoken to in. I said nothing. Neither did he. We stood in the October street, and the city breathed around us and my wolf, for the first time in 23 years of being told she was wrong, was completely, wholly, absolutely quiet. Not silenced. Settled. Chapter 8. The Throne That Was Always Hers. 3 things happened in the week that followed. The first, Kael requested a formal audience with the full Conclave Council. Not the emergency session, not the political maneuvering of the Harlow family's management attempt. A formal audience, The kind that the oldest pack protocols, which the Conclave had largely forgotten existed, specified as the appropriate format for communication between the original bloodline and an established pack governance body. Irene Kane, to her credit, recognized the protocol when it was cited to her. She prepared accordingly. The audience was set for Thursday. The 2nd. Mara Harlow called me. I almost didn't answer. But something in the persistence of the call, 3 rings, pause, 3 rings again, made me pick up. She said, "I want you to know that I didn't agree to what my father organized." I said, "I know." A pause. "You do?" "I saw your face in the council room," I said. "You didn't ask for that." A longer pause, then, "I've been told my whole life that I'm the right kind, the right shape. Ain't the right presentation." She stopped. "And I've spent my whole life watching what they do with the people who aren't, and I've been trying to figure out what my responsibility is in that." I said, "What made you call?" She said, "I watched him walk into that council room for you, and I thought, whatever I am in this hierarchy, I don't want to be the kind of person who benefits from it being used as a weapon." I thought about that. "Thank you for calling," I said. We talked for 20 minutes. She was different than I'd expected. Most things I was learning were. The 3rd, my wolf shifted. Not at a gathering, not under social pressure or evaluation, not in the context of any of the systems that had always made it feel like performance rather than truth. Alone, on the roof of my building, at 4 in the morning on a Tuesday when I couldn't sleep, with the city spread out below me and the cold air and the dark sky, and no one watching, no one judging, no one calculating where I fit in their hierarchy. She came out the way she'd always wanted to. Not rushed, not apologetic, not compressing herself into the available space. Large, dark, patient. She stood on the rooftop and looked at the city. And I understood, for the first time, what she'd been trying to tell me for 23 years. She wasn't wrong for the space. The space had just never been big enough. The formal conclave audience was held on Thursday at 7 p.m. Every council member was present. Most of the alpha families had sent representatives. Celeste was there, in the back row, watching with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this for a long time. Mara Harlow was there, not with her father. She sat on the other side of the room. I was there. Kael walked in at 7:01 p.m. He stood before the council and he spoke. Unhurriedly, completely, with the precision of someone who has been formulating this particular statement for longer than the institution he was addressing had existed. He spoke about the original pack design, about the function and significance of each designation, explained not as hierarchy in the contemporary sense but as ecology, different functions of equal importance, the health of the whole depending on the contribution of each. He spoke about the Omega lineage specifically, about what it had been built to carry, what it was still carrying in those who bore its full potency, meant how the Conclave's current evaluation system had lost the framework for recognizing what it was seeing when it encountered that potency. He said, "You have been measuring depth with a ruler designed for width, and calling it a flaw when the ruler comes up short." He said, "The oldest Omega line didn't disappear. It retreated. For good reasons. Over a very long time, it became less visible in pack spaces that had stopped being safe for it. But it didn't stop existing. It is in this room tonight." He looked at me. The room looked at me. "Not because I am assigning it," he said. "Because it is true. Because the evidence is in the historical record and in the direct observation of anyone who looks correctly. When because the wolf that Nova Bellamy carries is the largest female wolf in the Eastern Conclave's documented history, and the reason that's been classified as aberrant rather than ancestral is that the classification system forgot what it was for." He stopped. The room was very quiet. Richard Harlow started to speak. Irene Kane held up one hand. Harlow stopped. Irene looked at me. Nova Bellamy, she said. The formal address. But her voice had changed. Something shifting in it. The careful diplomat becoming something more honest. Is there anything you want to say to this council? I thought about all the things I could say. About Marcus Harlow's genuinely curious dismissal. About the dress that didn't fit. And the mirror I'd stood in front of. And the one good thing I'd trained myself to find every morning. Are about 23 gatherings in which I had made myself smaller and quieter and less than what I was because the space had been built for a different shape. About my wolf, standing on the rooftop in the dark, refusing to apologize for her size. I stood up. I said, I want to say that I'm done shrinking. A pause. I'm done apologizing for taking up space. I'm done treating my wolf like she's a problem to be managed rather than a thing to be understood. I'm done arriving at gatherings prepared for the ways I'm going to be found lacking and staying quiet when I am. I looked at the council table. The conclave is supposed to be our community, not a ranking system, not an aesthetic competition, a community. And communities don't work when they've decided some of their members are wrong for existing. Silence. Then Celeste, more from the back row, started clapping. She was the only one for about 3 seconds. Then Mara Harlow joined her. Then, gradually, reluctantly in some cases and with genuine feeling in others, the room. Not everyone. Richard Harlow did not clap. 2 of the council members did not clap. But most of them did. And my wolf, who had been quiet since the rooftop, settled into that sound like it was a bed she'd been waiting to lie down in. After, the conclave building emptying out, small clusters of people doing what people do after significant things happen, processing, arguing, recalibrating. Celeste with her arm around me for exactly 30 seconds before I told her I was fine, and she said, I know you are, and went to find someone to argue with about procedural history. Kael beside me in the corridor. Not touching, not crowding. Present. In the way he was always present. Fully. Without performance. I said, you didn't do this for me. He said, I did some of it for you. The part you didn't do for me. That part, he said, I've been needing to do for about 500 years. You were the occasion, not the reason. I looked at the corridor. At the architecture firm's artwork on the walls, the kind of abstract prints that provide texture without meaning, the most human possible kind of decoration. I said, the woman in 1887. He was quiet. Did you love her? Yes, he said, simply. No qualification. And you're here now because love doesn't follow the rules of time that everything else follows, he said. It has its own schedule, and its own logic. He looked at me. And because you are yourself. Not her. Not a continuation. You. He paused. I came to the gathering because I felt something I hadn't felt since London. I came to the diner because I needed to know if I was right. I'm still coming, he said, because I am right. And because every morning you tell me something about this city or that table's difficult customer or what you're thinking about that I haven't heard anyone think before, in 3,000 years of listening. I looked at him. Gold eyes, October light through the corridor windows, the weight of all that time in the lines of his face. I'm going to keep being myself, I said. I'm not going to become smaller or more convenient or more aligned with whatever the conclave thinks is appropriate. I know, he said, and I'm going to need time. I'm still figuring out what the thing you showed me means. The lineage, the wolf, all of it. I know, he said again, and you're patient. Extraordinarily, he said, and the corner of his mouth did the thing it did. The almost smile that wasn't quite a smile but was warmer than one. I breathed. Manhattan held us in its enormous, ordinary hands. I said, "French toast tomorrow?" He said, "I'll be in the corner." I nodded. I walked out into the city, and my wolf walked beside me. Not behind me, not hidden, not compressed into the shape the space allowed. Beside me, full-sized, her own shape. Finally, completely, without apology. Home. The end. And that is how Nova Bellamy proved that the world's labels are only as permanent as you allow them to be. She was called too heavy, too much, too soft. Wrong for the space. And for 23 years she showed up anyway, dressed in something that didn't quite fit. Standing in rooms that hadn't been built for her, looking in cracked mirrors for the one good thing. That discipline, that quiet, daily, relentless choosing to still be present, that was never weakness. That was the throne being built. One ordinary morning at a time. We often spend our lives trying to shrink ourselves to fit into spaces that were never meant for us, turning down the volume on our wolf, our laugh, our presence, apologizing for needing a bigger chair, a bigger dream, a bigger life than the people around us decided we deserved. But here is what Nova's story says. The very thing they told you was too much. Your size, your softness, your depth, your need for more space than the hierarchy allows, is frequently the rarest thing in the room. The measurement system that calls you lacking has simply lost the manual for what it was measuring. The ruler was designed for width. You are depth. That is not your problem. Your difference isn't your downfall. It's your divinity. I want to hear from you today. Which moment in Nova's story hit home? Was it the mirror scene? Finding the one good thing? Was it the rooftop, where her wolf finally stopped apologizing? Or was it the council room? The moment she stood up and said, "I'm done shrinking"? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If you want more stories like this, stories that celebrate the ones who were told they were too heavy, too loud, too quiet, too much, not enough, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notification bell. We are building something here for everyone who has ever stood in a mirror and had to talk themselves into their own worth. You deserve a community that knows your name. Until then, remember, you are not too much. You are not the wrong shape. You are not a problem for the space to solve. You are the space, finally expanding to fit what was always meant to be inside it. You are not a mistake. You are a masterpiece in progress. This is the Celine Shifter Romance Collection, and I'll see you in the next story.